Terry, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Shane?
I'm delighted to be joined with you again on a podcast that we weren't really going to have as a extended podcast, but we've decided to keep it going. And this is episode
Just
two.
it was the sparks that flew and the angels wept the first time around, and we just thought that it would be you know bad of us to not continue this roller coaster ride of these conversations about audio, advertising, and the benefits of Lemur.
Yeah. And the feedback we got, record breaking
Oh yeah,
views,
off the
record
charts.
breaking
Yeah.
listens, downloads.
Your mother loved it. My mother loved it. After that, we don't really care about whatever stats came in.
That's and it was so successful. We actually,
Yeah.
from the money generated, I got a new microphone off the back
There
of
you go.
one episode.
Brilliant. Yeah. I got a little yacht. It was a little dinky yacht. I just, it's the power of rejection. You
Well,
know.
you should have got one of those
If I get my
Lamborghini
little yacht,
speedboats
yeah,
instead. You wouldn't listen to me. Like
that's it.
McGregor.
Speaking
Mr.
of
McGregor.
McGregor, I just watched a video of McGregor in an ice bath against the other guy that he's competing against in this MMA team thing
Oh,
that
the
they're doing.
UFC not
UFC.
contender. It is
Yeah.
tough enough, isn't it?
Tough enough. So the two of them were in ice baths answering general knowledge questions.
Oh,
And
really?
Conor McGregor won. He won a table quiz in an ice bath. So, there's hope for us all yet.
The champ, champ, champ. You know.
Champ, champ. Yeah.
So
He was
yeah, that's
laughing
great.
like your man from Ray Liotta from Goodfellas, just constantly. Just to deal with the cold.
Funny how I amuse you. So yeah, so we decided to keep this thing going because we've been meaning to do a kind of a podcast, as you said, focus on certain topics to do with the industry, statistics, creativity in the space, making people more aware about the explosion in podcasts from a consumption level and the opportunity as a creative to get involved. Because as we touched on last week, consumption has gone through the roof, 465 million listeners worldwide and growing, yet creation of new podcasts is not keeping up with demand at all. There's estimated to be only 5 million podcasts globally, that is worldwide. And of those podcasts, 25% of them have only made one episode, which is crazy. The drop-off rate is so high. On average, 3 to 7 episodes, people give up because it's very difficult to do, very difficult to maintain, to scale. They run out of creativity, ideas. It's too much of a workload. And we solve all of those problems with Lemur and Lemur Enterprise, which is why we're here. Yeah, we're represented, got the brand on. If you're watching on video, you can see our t-shirts.
Disappearing.
One of the most sought after swag in all of social audio and podcasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, it's great. And to have someone like yourself, Terry, people do not know or may not know if they listen to this, your background and your expertise in audio. You're a professional voice actor. You have over 15 years experience in professional radio, one of the top producers of Ireland's probably most popular radio station for a long time and most popular radio show, the Strawberry Alarm Clock. I listened to it for years myself, and here I am talking to you now, the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz of audio. So,
a
just
very impressive person.
Very, very. I only hang around with impressive people, so you've made the cut. So that's
impressive. Yeah, I should get that tattoo. A very impressive person.
You have the love hate on your knuckles as well, which I like.
Exactly. Yeah.
So give the guys listening a little insight into your background on audio and why you have such a passion for it and what you see happening at the moment in the industry of radio and podcast.
Well, for me, the interest in audio came from a young age and kind of pressing record and play on the radio with the tape in, recording music from Atlantic 252 and listening to Dusty Rhodes and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't, they
The
weren't the
American
longest,
Dream,
most, the
Dusty
which?
Rhodes.
Not the American Dream Dusty Roads, the real Dusty Roads, the one that
Oh,
used to broadcast to Meath over here. And they actually knocked that antenna for Atlantic 252, and they did one in Tullamore as well that had the medium wave for RTE, and they collapsed them in on their own imprint. But that's besides the point. So Dusty Rhodes, used to listen to him and a good few others, and I was always interested in radio. Started in local radio in Midlands 103, doing work experience, and from there a kind of an interest in the technical side of it, but also the performance side of it in terms of being able to record yourself and put together sketches and all that kind of stuff that grew, slowly but surely. And then eventually I ended up in FM 104 in Dublin. And for 15 years, I was on the Strawberry Alarm Clock and producing comedy inserts for the show, as well as doing voiceover work and copywriting. So, that's my background in terms of radio. But definitely in the last few years, I've seen the transition to digital, and that there were more meetings about what was going on our social media pages than there was on the actual radio show, and the interaction between the two. Now, what we can see from the data that has come out is definitely proving that audio is superior in terms of an advertising medium and in terms of a creative medium as well, and easy to put ideas together and get them out quickly. And there's not a huge cost as there would be in terms of making a visual ad. So in terms of, like, what's your question again, Shane?
what's the meaning of life? No, I was just
Yeah.
asking to give an insight, a little bit of a insight into your love of audio and just your thoughts on the space of radio at the moment and the evolution and adoption by radio of podcasts. Because people go, oh, what's the difference? Why would radio get into podcasts? But there is a reason. And if you can touch on that.
Well, again, it's the evolution, I suppose, of the podcast, where there was one person looking after podcasts for the whole station back in 2012, 2013. And now there's a whole digital team that focus on digital media, obviously, but podcasts are a huge part of that. What normally we would have with a radio show is the highlights of the show, and you'd cut them together and put them up as a podcast. Whereas now you're seeing presenters doing their own podcasts outside of the radio station, but feeding into what's going on the show and vice versa. So it's nearly a case of that podcasts where they were kind of, a second thought to what was actually happening on the shows. Now they're growing and growing, and they can see the audience numbers are growing in terms of people listening to them. And it's far more relaxed for the presenters to go and do podcasts, as opposed to, having to watch your P's and Q's when you're on air.
Yeah, and I think it was a sign of the times in terms of where the industry is going in the podcast boom that is literally only getting started, was at this year's podcast show in London, 2023, where we were exhibiting for the first time. It was only the second time this show was ever held in Islington Business Centre in London. And it was your first time over at the show, representing the Limor, Limor, at the show, and you bumped into a lot of your colleagues from your time in radio. So to see the mainstream media radio at the podcast show was a big thing. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think you would have seen them there.
Absolutely not, no. And a lot of those guys have opted out of radio to go into the podcast industry because they can see where it is growing, where it is exploding, where there's far more options, I suppose, for creativity as well, that you're not just geared in. I'm talking about guys who would produce ads, would produce the station imaging, all that kind of stuff, that they've moved into something that's more kind of expansive in terms of even, podcast documentaries, apart from the advertising side of things, that they would have a more creative control over what they're doing, basically, as opposed to working for a company that is telling them what to produce. They have more choice in terms of who they deal with on a private capacity with clients.
And that's a great point you make there, Terry. What has been seen already over the last number of years in the social media space with the likes of Twitter to a smaller extent, but YouTube and video content, is you see a lot of people who were in the mainstream media going out on their own, and then people with no background in traditional media or being part of the establishment of creatives and actors and comedians, starting from nowhere and then being bigger than the mainstream media because it allows for that creativity, um, the opportunity to think outside the box and take risks, which I think is a big issue with mainstream media. Is they have sponsors and they have guidelines and they do not go outside the lines, which stifles interest and stifles the most
And
important
that's
thing,
that that
authenticity.
that's
Yeah.
not to poo-poo what general radio stations are doing, whatever. They have to cater for a very wide
Mm.
demographic and a very wide audience. Whereas you find if you go into individual creators and individual people that are geared toward one specific audience, it's a lot easier to focus in on something that could be more creative, but you're within the bounds of a specific audience, as opposed to having to please everybody. You know?
Yeah, and that's a problem in itself, trying to boil the ocean, trying to please everyone. And it's something maybe that they can look at and learn from because um as some of these independent creators, they have a niche to begin with, but they get more popular because of that creativity and authenticity and taking risks, that it expands their audience, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, we always talk about him because he is the biggest podcaster in the world, is Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, when he started off, was very niche. He was MMA, hunting and aliens.
Yeah,
And now, and more kind of, I suppose, liberal, left wing kind of leaning, as he'd say himself. But now he's got everyone, whether they're there to hate on him or support him. His audience is massive, and that came from purely just his love of it, his creativity, his.
yeah. And I think what stands out with him is his curiosity, that he will
Mm,
have probably, it doesn't matter who's sitting in front of him on whatever aisle they're on in terms of politics or religious beliefs or non religious beliefs, um, that he will just speak to the person that's in front of them. And I think, he's, for me, um, he can reach a lot of demographics. Now there are people that will just think Joe Rogan now, and he's a right wing, lunatic conspiracy theorist, whereas he didn't start out like that at all.
mm. Yeah, and I think, yeah, his interview style, and as he says, he only has people on who actually wants to talk to. He doesn't do, I know you need to this talk to this person because you're being sponsored and paid to talk to this person, like you see in a lot of late night talk shows, and you can tell it's very kind of forced and um not enjoyable. And he's the complete opposite of that. And that's the general theme you'll get across most podcast shows in general, is because the person who's the host is the creative behind it, and they talk to people they want to talk to, and that comes across. And that then also leads into, as your audience grows and a medium like podcasting scales as well, there's the opportunity to make money. And it's been difficult for podcasters in the past because, the audience, bar the kind of top 1%ers who already in general had an established social media following outside of podcasts that they could leverage to get listeners in and make more money. That's starting to change now, slowly but surely, as technology advances and the science advances as well. So what we wanted to touch on was a study that came out. We've been saying it for quite a while with, pitching to customers and our own research and what we found in terms of how powerful audio advertising is. But a recent study came out from Dentsu, which is the first study of its kind. Various big dogs involved in it, and has shown that audio advertisement is more powerful than video.
But just to give a background on it first, Shane, that in 2019 they actually did one in terms of visual attention. So they did one on the visual different media, television, and online, and all of that kind of stuff. So what they did was they took, I think it was data from 17,000 video views and 3,400 panel members, so across the UK, the US, and Australia. And they used that was kind of the broad study, and it was the first of its kind in terms of how long do people, okay, we know how many people are watching, but how long do they watch and what did they retain and all that kind of stuff. There would be a questionnaire then after they would look at whatever they were exposed to, kind of thing, and then what was retained, what wasn't retained, and all that. But it was the size of the study, and that's what they've been concentrating on for the last whatever it is for 4 years now. So this year, leading up to I think it was the end of July that they released the findings of the study. It was the attention and brand recall. They collaborated with Lumen Research, and it found obviously that audio outperforms video in capturing attention and generating brand recall. So that was the big finding of this, and that's huge for the likes of the radio industry, the music streaming industry, and of course the podcast industry. And when you run through the statistics, podcasts really do show how huge they are in terms of retaining people and the attentiveness and the information that they take in, and the trustworthiness of the interviewers who are interviewing people in podcasts.
Again, and it's coming back to that again and again and again, is the authenticity, the trust factor, the listening to that person, and whether you agree or don't agree with it, that you believe what they're saying. And authenticity and trust and that kind of emotion is very, very important for building relationships in everyday life. So when it comes to your consumption of content, whether it's talking about ancient aliens or golf or rugby or whatever it is, you want to think that the person you're listening to really means what they're saying. And then you throw in the entertainment aspect of it as well. And just the way that you compute and get absorbed into a podcast conversation is brilliant. It's like being in the room alongside the people, and you build a real relationship with them. And that's something very unique about the medium, I think, and why people like it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of that study, then, just to hit that home, that basically the difference between audio and the visual ads, it was 41% higher in terms of the average brand recall. So they throw in different brands into what they were listening. So basically what they got a bunch of people into an environment where they would normally listen to the radio or listen to a podcast, and they would expose them to the audio. And then afterwards, after so long a time, they would bring them in, and then they would ask them to put them through the survey the exact same way that they did with the visual media. And that's what's interesting about it, that they've done it the exact same way. But all this information has come out in terms of there's a difference of 41% higher brand recall for audio as opposed to 38% for visual. Now you would imagine that that's only 3%, but that's huge in terms of how we think of, you think ads, you think advertising, you're thinking visually, you're thinking, off the top of your head, you're thinking, okay, there's a billboard here, there's something on the television, whatever it is, but you don't realize that it's the audio side of it that is really kind of that helps you retain the information, I suppose.
Yeah, it's funny how the brain works on that, and whether it is like a conversation, a personality, like that. I need to go back in and find the scientific term for it in terms of community. How many people that a brain can actually compute when it comes to faces or recognize of people. It's around 150, and they found in ancient tribes or modern tribes in the Amazon and stuff like that once a tribe got to the size of like 200, it would split into two separate ones of 100 and begin again, because you can only remember so much at one time. And I think this is only a guess. I'm going to have to go in and check it out more. I think it's quite similar to that when it comes to the audio aspect of it. So voices, so your community, who you're listening to, whether it is a Joe Rogan, you get that in your mind that that's someone in my community, and I believe them, and I want to listen to them and get engaged with them. And I've listened to more of his content than talked to some of my friends in the last number of years, and listen to that person. So that goes in, and that's why I think it builds that relationship, which helps with the memory. That's the point I'm trying to get. You know, like you can only remember so many faces, 150. That's actually what they do in the army. I think is it battalions have maximum 150 because of that for soldiers to remember who's in their unit. It goes beyond
Really?
that.
Okay.
Yeah, they forget the
Yeah.
faces. You can only compute so many faces. So I think it's very similar with voices and in communication as well. Again, I could be completely wrong, but I'm just presuming it's the same. And that sense, certainly the sense that I have when I listen to podcasts and remember things more when it comes to that.
Well,
And
you
then
think
it's
about
also
it for thousands of years when, the human race were passing down stories, they weren't written, they were through the spoken word. And, that's obviously something that we have developed over time as well, that, the ability to take in that information without realizing we're taking it in, that it's there.
And the subtleties of communication with voice, whether you say a word like this or you say a word like that, I'm happy or I'm angry or I'm sad, or that emotion and context and all that stuff can be lost when it comes to text, most definitely.
Yeah.
And then video, then there's a sense of the distraction that comes with video too, because if there's lots of things going on, it can distract you from what's actually being said in a visual perspective too. So
That's the
that's
thing.
really interesting.
And don't forget sound effects as well, because if you do, straight away, what I
Do that
mean by
again.
that. So, that's there's not.
He's trying to make the sound of a fart. There, that's a better one.
That's it. Just
he's actually like his tongue wasn't even coming
just
out.
my wipers. I'm gonna get the wipers on the screen there. There you go. How about that?
So, and that trust factor, the brand recall, again, the sonic identity aspect, the sound and jingles makes perfect sense. When you describe that to people and you ask them, we've done it so many times talking to people, have you heard of sonic identity? And they go, or sonic branding. And I go, no, what's that? And then you give the example like, ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving it. They go, they get it. And there's very, very few people you talk to that won't understand what that brand is, what that product is, their experience of eating that food. And the word McDonald's was never mentioned, chips were never mentioned, burgers, milkshakes. That's the power of audio. And you applying that to conversation and podcasts as well is absolutely incredible. And then the important thing as well, follow the money. And marketers and agencies to see how much money, extra money. As you said, 3% is a lot when it goes into the millions.
100%. Yeah. 100%, 3%. Yeah.
So your pals in radio, as you're mentioning, I was very lucky to meet a few of them at the podcast show as well. What's their perspective on podcasts moving into the future? Of course, you have the people who are still in radio, and then there's the people who've moved out. So is there something you've learned or anything in particular that stands out to you that you've learned talking to them over the last number of months?
But it's okay from different, as the years went by and you heard podcasts first you kind of, it's like an idea. It's like first you kind of laugh at it, then you kind of make fun of it if it's coming in closer and closer to your piece of the pie, and then you go, oh God, this is getting bigger. We better do something about this. We better start getting involved with this, and then slowly but surely you kind of go, okay, well, this is the thing, this is the new thing, type of thing. So I don't think it's a case of people in the radio industry going, oh, podcasts are bad, and I think they've enhanced what's going out on air, and they've broadened the horizons of people, presenters and whatnot, to go into potentially do a series of podcasts that they're interested in outside of their persona on the radio, all that kind of thing. And there's one guy in particular that has gone down the route of mental health, and he has branched off into the podcast arena of doing mental health podcast, which he's very much into. And there are other people that have gone into areas that they're interested in, and they're using their skills that they had honed on the radio, and they're using them in podcasting.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think from your interactions, my interaction, talking with some of those people within the industry, it's changed massively even in the last year. That's what I've noticed. the one kind of, oh, it's kind of interesting, but not right now, to, yeah, we'd like to learn more about this. It's more accepting, they're more open to talking to it. Some people are very excited about the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that radio has learned from traditional media who may have made mistakes in the past, like newspapers, for example, or that who completely ignored social media when it first came along. And they said, we don't need that. We are the media,
Yeah.
they learned fairly quickly that, well, not very quickly, some of them took a long time to learn that you need to adopt tools and, the evolution and innovation sooner rather than later, or you'll get left behind.
I think what we're talking about now are people who are already in the audio industry and
Yeah,
know how audio works and how to create, interesting and engaging content and all that kind of stuff. And it's a case for them of just transferring over to another medium. So
yeah,
that's an easy transition. What we're talking about, I suppose, with Lemur are people that have never entered the professional audio space, and to explain to them that you don't need to be in the professional audio space to create podcasts. And whereas you have people in the radio industry that, okay, they've slowly transitioned over to making audio elsewhere. Even that transition has taken time.
yeah.
So you can imagine that it will take as much time, if not longer, for people that have never been involved in making a podcast in terms of advertising their business. That's transition. And part of our job at Lemur is to show them that it is possible, and it's a lot easier than they think.
Yeah, and we're going to help speed up that adoption by individuals as well, because it's been slow, because making podcasts is not easy for ordinary people who aren't knowledgeable and who aren't skilled up. So we've removed those barriers with Lemur, with the Lemur app. All you need is your phone, Lemur, and your voice. You can instantly record and share voice content and podcasts, full-length podcasts, traditional podcasts. But what's key about Lemur as well is we have to emphasize and mention, and this is still the adoption from the radio perspective. So one thing that we're bringing new to radio that they haven't had before is interactive podcasts. So they've got the skill set and being creative and knowing how to produce and in the audio space, but they don't have the interactive aspect of it. And it kind of harkens back to that point you made of the digital, and that there was so much focus on the social media aspect because they didn't have the interaction piece for voice. We now are able to provide that to them. So that's what I find really exciting. And that's some of the feedback we got from people in the radio industry is like, wow, this is what we've been looking for. So huge potential on that. So if there's anyone listening to this in the radio space, reach out to us. But no, it's really interesting to see that stat around the power of audio advertising, the growth of podcasting. Great to share a little bit about your background. We'll dive into that in more detail in the future. Never know, we might have one of those guys on.
I don't know if you noticed, I hate talking about myself, so unless I'm in a pub, that's all I talk about.
Or if you've got a cravat, have a pint.
I'm brilliant company.
Yeah,
talking about myself.
But no, definitely, I think that's an idea, Terry. Maybe we might be able to persuade one of your former colleagues to come on and join us here on Voices.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll get one of the lads on,
which would be good fun. But I think that's almost 30-40 minutes now we've done, which is what we want to do for these episodes. Keep them short and sweet so people can consume them and talk to us as well. So if there's anyone listening to this cast who would like to ask myself or Terry some questions about podcasting or social audio, the industry of audio in general, or learn about Lemur, please do let us know. You can reach out to us, of course, on our social media. And more importantly, you can talk to us directly on Lemur by downloading the Lemur app from the App Store or Google Play Store and leave us a voice comment, because Lemur is interactive podcast and you can leave voice comments underneath the podcast to spark real conversation. So visit the website.
You just have to press the button and speak.
Yeah,
that's it. There's nothing more complicated than that, like less complicated than that.
And you don't need to worry about how your hair looks or if you're
Yeah.
shading or
Now,
any
now that you
action.
now that you mention it, yeah.
Pretty slick.
Don't know, it was kind of a bit floppy there now. I don't know if I should mention this now, but the hair the last day was kind of more like that. I realized that when I do this, I kind of look like somebody from
A certain
our,
Austrian
our,
painter.
our collective past.
Yeah.
So I took that picture in black and white with some interesting speech music behind it.
Probably wouldn't go down too well on getting new customers though.
No, probably not. Show up at a meeting like this.
Yeah.
So, do you like to talk to your audience?
On that note, Terry, we're
Yes.
going to boogie like it's 1945 and head out of here. So always a
I,
pleasure.
I won't
Thanks
give
for
the salute.
no. Thanks for joining episode 2 of Where
I
Voices Meet.
hope you like it, Mammy.